Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of High Top Sports Oregon. We've got a jam-packed one for you guys today. You guys loved the last one. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe. Let's go ahead and dive into our Oregon insider, Derek the Duck Zelmer. Derek, how are we doing, Bubba?
Good, man. How are we doing this week?
We're doing fantastic. It was a great Sunday. It was beautiful here. I know you're out in Cali, so the weather, usually is never not bad there. In Florida, it's finally starting to feel good. Felt like a spring day. Had its nice coolness going on, so it was fantastic. It's like a bunch of old people talking about the weather, but it's nice. I love where we're heading into the springtime. It fires me up. But man, I swear I can't open up Twitter, and maybe it's because now I'm obviously liking everything that you post and following the Ducks, but I feel like I can't get Dan Lanning and the Ducks just smashing in every category right now off my screen.
Yeah, man, it's a great little trend we got going on here for Oregon fans. It's like people think the dead period means that there's not much going on, but man, that's couldn't be farther from the truth. We constantly got, visitor updates coming up and, crystal balls have been dropping the last few weeks and what have you. Obviously, headed toward the spring game here and just the kind of the hype around that. So, per usual, even in the dead season, it's a pretty exciting time to be a Duck fan, in particular when you got Dan Lanning running the ship. It's you're always in for some fun stuff, especially on the recruiting trail.
Well, good news. We're moving out. The end of this week will be the end of the dead period into the quiet period. For anybody that doesn't know what that means, is now you are able to have recruits back on campus. So before this dead period that we were in, all that could happen was just communication via phone, email, texting, no visiting from either party. You couldn't go visit them. They couldn't come visit you. Now players are allowed to come back on campus. I don't believe players or coaches, are allowed to visit players during this next period, but they can come visit them, which will obviously be during spring practice and the spring game. So during the spring game, things might open up a little bit more. But for the March, at least, during these practices, it's going to be huge to have players on. And you guys have a set of big-time visitors coming up here soon. Let's talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll dive right into it. So the first one we got listed, Michael Fazushi, 5-star offensive lineman. Obviously, being a 5-star, he's a very highly coveted prospect. 6'5", 285, number 15 nationally. I think he's the number 2 overall offensive tackle in this year's cycle. But he did announce that he will be taking a visit to Eugene. That'll happen on April 17th through the 18th. As I mentioned, very high priority target. Kind of as we sit right now, it seems to be it's a little more of a Oklahoma Texas battle for that front position in terms of securing a commitment. But like many other commitments, we kind of talk about how Dan Lanning's a closer, and a lot of things happen later in the cycle. So it's just good to get him on campus this early. I have a feeling we'll see another visit happen later in the fall with Michael. So that one's pretty exciting.
Speaking of Michael, real quick before you continue, he has, obviously his list right now, Oklahoma's leading the way, but he's got a couple of schools, Florida, obviously my school being one of them, but he hasn't set a visit up for Florida. So for Oregon to land himself a visit is absolutely massive. I think he only has 4, maybe 5 visits that he's set up already. So for Oregon to get in this thing early is going to be huge. Again, for a kid from Texas, to pull him from Texas, big move. Again, Oregon, I feel like has always played a big player and big time names. But again, disagree with me if I'm wrong here. I just feel like you guys are now in that top tier talent that typically you see the Ohio States, the Oregon, or the Georgias and the Bamas fighting for. Oregon seems to have their hat on a lot of them. Usually you'll have 1 or 2. I feel like you're in the conversation for damn near all of them at the moment.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And the farther we go along with this list here, there's a common trend going on, and it seems to be the finalists for a lot of these guys. We're hearing the same: the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Michigans. Florida's in on a lot of these guys as well. But it just kind of speaks to the level of recruitment that's trying to take place with Dan Lanning and the Ducks. It's just like when you can have your name mentioned in the final conversation with some of these perennial blue blood programs, it speaks volumes to what we're doing on the recruiting trail. So yeah, as you mentioned, absolutely exciting stuff. Oklahoma is one that we're battling for a couple of these prospects on the board. But we'll see what happens. Like I said, it's early in the cycle. But just kind of moving on with DJ. He's one, I know we talked about a couple of weeks ago. We mentioned how that man's all over the country. He was visiting, everybody and their grandma throughout the country. But he did say that he's going to be visiting Oregon on June 21st of this year. So that's great news for the Ducks again to get him back on campus. I think this will be his 3rd time unofficially, but number 7 overall prospect, number 1 player out of the state of Florida, which you're well versed in. And once again, the finalists for that one, we got Bama, Georgia, Miami, Michigan, and Oregon are kind of leading the pack there in the top 5. As we know, anything happens as we kind of move along with the commitment. But once again, it's really nice to have your name mentioned along with some of those guys. And then the one personally I'm most excited for, the one that I really hope we can get ahead with on the track is Jonah Williams. He's the number 2 linebacker in this year's class. He'll be visiting Oregon here in just a few weeks, actually, on March 17th. So it's really nice to have him on campus again. I know there's been a little bit of steam around him over the past few weeks, and it's nice to get him in early in the cycle. So then, hopefully we're able to get one of those fall visits, heading a little more toward, the critical period of where we see these high level recruits commit. But for him currently, he's crystal balled to Oklahoma, and then that's a Steve Wiltfong thing. So, anytime you see that, anytime you see that, I don't want to say it's 100% because there's no such thing as 100% in college football.
The
We've seen some
Wiltfong
crazy.
is it's a deadly diagnosis.
Yeah, you really got to take that one with a grain of salt. It's probably coming at some point. But what I choose to remember is say he commits here in the next couple weeks to Oklahoma. It's a long cycle before we hit the early signing period in December, and wouldn't be the first time we've seen some high caliber prospects flip their recruitment late in their cycle. So
For sure.
once again, it's good to just get him on campus again. I think it's pretty important to get him back on in the fall, especially toward the end of his recruitment cycle. But, we'll see what happens there. It's never a bad thing to get these guys on. And then the last one is not necessarily a visit that's taking place. This is just one that's been really picking up steam for Oregon recently. It's Trajan Odom. He's a 3-star actually out of the state of North Carolina. But the interesting thing to me here is over the last few months, the dude has really been picking up a lot of scholarship offers from these high level programs. So fairly recently, we've seen Bama, Georgia, Florida State, Ohio State, and Miami. Ohio State's pushing really strongly to, get him back on campus again shortly here. But, it was reported on 247 that, Oregon's currently looking like a favorite to land him, which is, that's good news for us. It's being a 3-star. I know a lot of people are kind of turned off by the stars, and I get it. It doesn't have that sexy look to it when you have a 3-star, but the man has tremendous upside. He's sitting at 6'5", 265. And I think he put on some more weight, come this fall. And it'd be a big one. I know, in our last video talking about a 3-star that committed, some people gave me a little pushback on it, but this is one we really want, being Ducks fans, especially when you can get on him early in the cycle. It'd be a pretty big commitment, believe it or not, just being a 3-star. So we're pretty excited about that. Hopefully we're able to close on him.
I'm excited again. I mean, we're going to start heating up here, I would believe, with recruiting and guys committing. Being a Gator fan, it's still fun just to watching guys commit and seeing the graphics and then watching this thing unfold. So I'm really pumped to be a part of this with you and see how this is going to unfold this year. I think it's going to be a really electric year for you guys. I mean, it has been for the last 2, but it will be interesting again, which we kind of keep alluding to. Is Dan going to be a little more ahead of the 8 ball than he has in prior years? And it feels that it's going to be. I think he really wants to come in and look. I think a big goal would be to win the Big Ten. If you can top Ohio State or at least be and kicking distance, that's massive. Michigan has never really. They'll finish around 11-10. They're kind of like a Utah in the sense where they stack up and build for a very long time. They'll get a lot of good guys. They'll be up there early, but in sense of quality, and this isn't a shot towards Michigan. They kind of trend towards the back as other schools ramp forward. So Ohio State's kind of the guy that you're chasing for sure for recruiting. So should be a fun one to watch it unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. In Ohio State, that's obviously the one too. Myself, we know it. Duck fans know it. Big Ten fans know it. It's like the preseason thought, at least, is it's going to come out down to be, an Oregon-Ohio State battle for the most part. And like I said, that's no disrespect to Michigan. They could absolutely, have another phenomenal year, which wouldn't really surprise me, to be honest. It's just, if we're talking preseason natties in the Big Ten, we're looking between Ohio State and Oregon. So yeah, we have that October 12th game. That game's looming large. But we'll see.
I'm pumped. I'm pumped to be a part of that too. It's cool to. What I love about this again, being just a college football fan, is getting to put my tentacles into this and getting the pulse and seeing just a different fan base. It's cool. It's fun to watch for sure, and hopefully adding a different perspective right? Sometimes you hop into these shows and these channels, and you've got just like for my channel, we're all Gator fans, so you're getting a lot of bias. You know what I mean? You're just getting what we want to hear, what we want to say. Versus this back and forth, I'm just gonna give you from a over. Like I have no hate against the Ducks, so you're not gonna get a negative view. You're just gonna get a view. You take it with what you will. So it will be fun to watch. I do secretly. I was high on the Ducks last year. Just so we're clear. I do. I like them a lot. I just I think they're a fun group and a fun team. So it'll be good to watch. But let's talk the fans. The Ducks went nuts in the comment section about the wide receiver room. I think you crushed it. You were a little worried that you might have got a little flack on your thoughts, but the Duck fans came out of quacking. So they loved it. We're doubling down. We're going into the cornerback/safety room. You're going to give us your thoughts. Maybe you don't make it out alive on this one. I think it'll be just fine, but give us your take on it.
Yeah, so this is one in particular where in my opinion at least, this is the most interesting, kind of breakdown of a specific position group just because it looks so different. So the graphic we have up on the screen right now is kind of how I project the starters to be for this season. And if you take a look at it right now, we have 4 starters and we have, 4 new faces coming into the program. So obviously, Jabbar Muhammad, Duck fans were really familiar with him coming over from UW, led that defense to a national championship appearance this year. I believe he was second team all conference this year. Had 3 interceptions, but he's a really high upside player. When he was getting ready to commit, it was between, Oregon, Texas, Alabama. So that kind of tells you the caliber of player he is. So that was big to secure that commitment. But, just kind of how the room plays out right now, I expect him to be our cornerback 1 this year. Without a doubt in my mind, he's probably the safest one in terms of who's on the screen and who I think will be starting this year. And then the one that I know not a lot of people are familiar with, it was kind of a commitment that flew under the radar, but Cam Alexander. So he was an all-conference AAC player for UTSA this year. He was the Frisco Bowl MVP. He was their team skill player at defensive MVP this year. 2 interceptions, but the dude's a ball hawk, not afraid to have the nose for contact. And he's one who I think, as we sit right now, is trending toward being the starter there. I know Oregon fans, we're not seeing Jaleel Florence right now, who was a starter for us last year, but I do think just kind of the manner in which we brought him in, him being a super senior, I think we're going to see him start in that CB2 position this year. He's got tremendous upside, so I'm kind of excited to see how he jives in a little bit more with, a higher caliber conference, but definitely has all the tools. I think, he's a potential day 2 pick next year, so we're really excited to have him on campus. And then speaking of, guys who kind of flew under the radar was Brandon Johnson, the nickel from Duke that came over. He's another one where I know not a lot of people were super familiar with when they secured the commitment. It was a pretty quiet commitment that took place there, but he's one who I definitely think will be starting in the nickel for us this year. I know last year we saw a lot of Nico Reed kind of in that spot, but I think Brandon Johnson plays that spot exceptionally well. Once again, he was Duke's defensive skill player MVP this year for their team, and for good reason. The dude's an absolute hammer in the secondary. He had more tackles for loss coming out of the nickel position for Duke than any Duck player had in this 23 season. And that obviously Jordan Birch, talking Brandon Dorless, he cleared them with ease in terms of the TFL. So he's highly effective in the run game. Definitely no slouch in the pass game either, but I think he's somebody who Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy are going to value tremendously just because of the versatility he brings to the defensive side of the ball. So I think we're going to see him slide into that nickel spot. It's nice to have Nico Reed in that, in that backup role. And I think he'll absolutely get his fair share of playing time too. But I think we're going to see Brandon Johnson get that starting spot. And then arguably the one I'm most excited for personally is Kobe Savage coming in from Kansas State. 2-time second team all Big 12 player. Once again, this year was the case. But talk about another dude who's not afraid of contact, definitely has a nose for the ball, can affect the run game. He's a heavy hitter. And, that's something we like to see out of our safety positions. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Javon Holland. In that Oregon secondary a few years ago. Obviously, he was pretty successful with the Miami Dolphins over the last 2 years, especially this year. But Kobe reminds me a lot of him and kind of his style of play. So I think he's going to slide perfectly well into that spot. I don't really see any way in which he's not starting this year. So, yeah, definitely excited to have him starting. But, as you guys can see, we clearly have an all new secondary via the transfer portal this year. So, anytime you're kind of bringing in a ton of new faces, you don't really know how the dynamics going to play into it until we, hit the field week one this year. But just kind of the caliber of players we're bringing in, it's the secondary looks to be definitely a position of strength and depth for the Ducks this year.
That's been a common thread this year, I think, with the transfer portal is are people going to be able to adapt? Are they going to be able to adjust with the changes? Right? Where's the team chemistry going to be? I think it's a big factor. I think it's huge. I think, though, with the new wave of college football, it's going to have to be part of your new skill that you're learning, right? How do I adapt? How do I adjust? You're going to have to learn that anyways, but you're going to learn it much faster now. Also, too, which I don't think people are realizing, and I'm just following this along, following recruiting. These guys, it's kind of like AAU basketball, where they're playing with a new team almost every week. My little brother plays on 7-on-7. He has his high school team that he plays with. He plays with a 7-on-7 team that they challenge, that they go to tournaments with. But also, too, when they practice or play in small tournaments, some of the guys are like, it's not worth me going out there. So he'll play with a different set of wide receivers. These young men are used to playing and kind of playing on the fly from a very early age, more so now than they ever have before. So I don't think it played as much as a factor. I also think it's a big thing because we saw it last year with March Madness. These teams, these blue blood schools are kind of just, plugging and chugging. The team that does have some consistency in there, I believe will kind of poke through. Michigan was that team this year. So don't get it twisted. I think if you can find that sweet spot like Michigan did, it's going to play a role. But ultimately, 80%, 85% of the college football is dealing with this. So there's only a few teams that are going to have an upper hand, and not many of them are going to be at the same level of Michigan. You'll have kind of like maybe like a West Virginia, right? That'll be able to bring it. I think I can't remember what school is bringing back a lot of talent, but you're like, who? It's like the 98th percentile this year. And it's like they're not going to be a factor, but they're bringing back 98% of the talent that participated on the field last year. Not going to mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's like on paper it looks great, and that's kind of all we have to go off of at this point. I mean, even the spring game, that's only going to give you flashes, be obviously for they split them up a little bit differently, and they don't quite have that cohesiveness built into it yet. But unfortunately, we don't play games on paper, so who knows?
Which
You
is a
can
good
have all
point.
the talent in the world, but if they're not gelling and jiving, and schematically things are working the way they need to, it's kind of all for naught. So, I have full confidence that these dudes can come in and, get everything pat down, be solid. I think obviously it'll take some time to kind of get that cohesiveness and that, that gel factor going on. But, you know, I, I'm excited for it. But, then again, I can't promise anything. So you never really know how that one plays out.
For sure. Let's take a look. I mean, you've got some honorable mentions or some other names you expect to see this year in their respective positions. Let's go run through this and then go from there.
Yeah, sure. So in the cornerback room, obviously, I think that's probably the deepest room we have in our defensive side of the ball for sure. There's just absolutely a plethora of talent that is sitting gonna in the two deep, two, three deeps currently. Sione Lalea, he was the number one JUCO cornerback in this year's cycle. I think he's going to get playing time. He's a very high caliber player for sure. What he puts on tape, even albeit at the JUCO level, is highly impressive. I don't think he came to Oregon to, sit on the bench and, see his playing time kind of slip away just due to the depth. I think he's coming in ready to compete right away. So I do think we're going to see plenty of him this year. I would kind of compare it to what we saw in 2023. Obviously we had Kyrie Jackson and Jaleel Florence that were starting, but we saw tons of other guys getting playing time between the Dante Mannings of the world. Will be pretty familiar with Triquez Bridges. He had a decent amount of playing time this year. Nico Reed, he played a lot of nickel, but then again, he had a lot of versatility that he brought in last year's cycle. So I think we're going to see something similar to that. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Jaleel Florence, he was a starter for us last year. I don't think he's going to be a starter per se this year, barring injuries and what have you. But I also don't think that means that he's not going to see any playing time. I think we're going to see a very heavy rotation in the secondary, just because, you're afforded all that talent that's sitting there. So I think, they're absolutely going to use it. And kind of the same with Dante Manning. He was kind of our guy who was our plug and play when someone was injured or, all the unforeseen circumstances that happened throughout the year. He saw a decent amount of playing time last year. And I expect that to kind of be much of the same this year. Same with Nico Reed. I know I talked about how Brandon Johnson will likely be the starter in that nickel role this year, but I don't think that means Nico Reed takes a complete back seat. He played really well, and they continuously talk about an impact that he can make. So I do expect him to see him in 24 once again. Um, and then back on there, Roderick Pleasant's another one. He's a young dude, an absolute speedster. I know people who kind of follow Oregon track. Um, he's an absolute burner. I think he's projected to be like the third fastest cornerback in all of college football right now. He'll absolutely get some time as well this year. Just going down the list, Aaron Flowers, true freshman. He's arguably the only true freshman that I do see getting some playing time this year. Once again, he's the most day one ready out of this year's defensive cycle in terms of the secondary that I see. I don't think we're going to see him a whole lot, but I do think he sees some minutes in the secondary. And then kind of the last few that are on this list are really a toss up for me. Kamar Terrell, he's one who he's been around the program for quite a while. He had some playing time in 22 and 23 both. He's just one of those guys who was never able to quite make that leap like we wanted to see him be made. With that being said, I think this is kind of his make or break year for sure with the Ducks. So he'll get his opportunities on the field. It's just I expect him to have a fairly short leash. And then the next four guys listed, there's a lot of versatility that happens with these guys. I believe Dalen Austin's technically listed as a cornerback, albeit I think he's going to get some time at safety as well, just because that's kind of where we're going to see a little more opportunity for playing time. I do think we're going to see him a little bit. We saw him in flashes last year, but we don't really know. I think he will get some playing time. And then the last three, in my opinion, are three guys who are transfer portal watches. So I know we've been talking about how we have 7 spots who we need to kind of free up in order to meet that scholarship threshold. Tyler Turner, Cody DeCambra, and Colin Gill. I think they are definitely candidates to hit the portal. Once again, I preface this every time. I have no insider information. This is not me saying that, they're absolutely the ones who are going to be hitting the portal. I'm just saying if I had to choose some names from the secondary to, be the candidates, it's definitely these guys. And, when we're sitting this deep with talent, and this many young bodies on this roster and this many scholarships that we need to clear off, I think we're going to see 1 to 2 of these guys at least hit the portal. So just kind of interested to see how that plays out. There's a lot of unknown in the secondary, which is why I thought this would be a pretty fun little episode for Duck fans. But
For sure.
it's excited to see this one unfold, to say the least.
Well, and look, this is something you speak to every time is the amount of scholarships you have. So there's going to be some attrition. It's inevitable. So trying to figure out where that is, it's like you said, just kind of a guessing game. We on our show we kind of talk, and when you're invested in it, and you talk about it a lot, and you are reading certain articles. Sometimes you can read the tea leaves and figure out where things are headed, even though we don't have an actual pulse on it. You could still be throwing curveballs. With whatever. I do believe this May transfer portal cycle will be the busiest one yet. Not a very hot take there, given the fact that it's like the third one, I believe. I just think with the attrition at Michigan and the coaching change at Alabama, I think that's going to have a factor. The coaching change at UCLA, Arizona, Washington, some of those things were a little late. We didn't get to see a full turnover, I believe. And I also think guys going to new schools might find a new home as well too, and new recruits that are having to fight for spots. I think it's going to be a busy one. I think for you guys, it's going to be more of a just cleaning up the fat, more or less than being aggressive in there. Unless there's somebody that hits that thing, and you're like, hey, we got to trim off a lot of fat because I want this guy. I don't see Oregon being very aggressive. Could be wrong, but I think you guys are set for next year.
Oh, completely agree. I've seen some fans kind of dig in there, and they're like, "Oh, who are we looking at in this spring cycle?" I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but kind of like you mentioned, I don't think we're going to be very aggressive at all. If we get one of those surprises that hits the portal that everybody wants, obviously I would expect Dan to kind of reach out and at least put the feelers out there and kind of see what happens. But it's, in the spring cycle, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of depth pieces for these various programs hit the cycle. This is kind of where these guys understand what their role is going to look like if they stick around for the fall. So, fortunately for some of these, programs who aren't quite as full, there's a lot of hidden gems that are going to be out there that'll be, making their presence known in the fall that people aren't quite so aware of to this point. But like you mentioned, in terms of what Oregon's roster is going to look like, I think it's just going to be a lot of, kind of trimming those pieces at the bottom layer of it. So that's kind of where I think we're at in that.
For sure. Well, guys, another great episode. Again, the Duck fans, you guys are incredible. The amount of support and love that y'all put in the comments is fun to watch. Derek the Duck, I see you guys always going back and forth, chatting it up with them, and breaking down your thoughts. But also, too, some exciting stuff. This episode should be available on iTunes, Spotify, and other listening platforms. I think like Google Play and things like that. So if you guys are unable to watch it, or maybe you want to just put your phone down and not have to keep YouTube open, you can go take a listen to it on those platforms there. So this episode will be up. The other ones are not, but this one should be up fairly soon. I'm hoping to have it up at the same time. So if you guys want to go subscribe to those channels on whether podcast, Spotify, however you guys listen, go do that, because that would be great if you guys want to support us there as well. Well, Derek, that's all I have. Do you have anything else that you wanted to express to your little ducks?
I don't think so. As always, I appreciate the support. Duck fans have been very generous in terms of providing that for us over the last couple of weeks. We are given a lot of love after a wide receiver video last week. So I encourage everybody to keep subscribing to the channel. It's only up from here, continuing to grow week by week. So yeah, pretty exciting stuff. But, I look forward to continuing to bring all the good news for the Ducks going forward.
Love it. I'm Shelton. That's Derek the Duck Zelmer. You guys be good. I love you. Peace and love.